What's going on, guys? Danny here from Metal Couch, and today I'm going to be talking about the 16th studio album from Iron Maiden, The Book of Souls. Now, my history with Iron Maiden goes back to the very beginning of this channel, 2010, The Final Frontier coming out, one of the first albums I ever reviewed on the internet ever, besides some of the Ultimate Guitar stuff, but that's ancient history. Final Frontier, to me, was a pretty good album. I gave it a very high rating 5 years ago. And so when The Book of Souls was announced to be released this year, I was hyped. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it, try to find out, is this going to be as good as The Final Frontier, what with Bruce Dickinson going through the cancer battle and all of that. Also, just the amount of degradation that has happened in his voice live over the past 5 years. I was wondering with the quality of The Book of Souls. And much to my surprise, this is a 2-disc experience. Clocks in at about 92 minutes. And I'll touch on that a little bit once we start going through some of the track listing. We open up with If Eternity Should Fail. And this one didn't do it for me. I feel like this is a track that falls short in many aspects. As an album opener, it is very, very bad. I think that with Speed of Light and how that was put out beforehand, I think Speed of Light would have been better as an opener, to open up with a single, because this song just, it's 8.5 minutes long, and I got bored halfway through. And you're going to notice that that's a little bit of a recurring theme with this album. 92 minutes, 8.5 minute long opening track. Now, you could say, well, The Final Frontier had Satellite 15, The Final Frontier, which is just as long. Yes, but Satellite 15, The Final Frontier is a much better album opener than this. This, to me, is just stale, stagnant, and goes into one of my first big gripes with this album, and immediately hit me. And I kind of had a hint of this with Speed of Light. The production value on this album leaves a lot to be desired. It is incredibly flat. It is a hugely flat, modern production. I feel like the production of The Book of Souls, it has no character. It's like early 2000s Iron Maiden. They're not trying to necessarily make an album that stands out from the rest when it comes to the production. And you've had plenty of those within their back catalog. You could take a look at Somewhere in Time, which is probably their most unique sounding album. The album that I always praise having the most unique identity. Or even Seventh Son of a Seventh Son having a unique identity. This one does not have that. It sounds just like any other heavy metal album with a modern production out there. It's nothing special. There are times where vocals are drowned out by other instruments. With bass has always been up in the Maiden mix, which doesn't really bother me at all, but at sometimes even the bass is drowned out, which is something that I look forward to in a Maiden album, is audible bass. It is a trademark. This production is just incredibly muddied and leaves a lot to be desired and is ultimately disappointing, even in comparison to The Final Frontier. You listen to the opening with Satellite 15 and how that's a drum machine opening that album up, and a few synths here and there, like get on Starblind or something like that. And we do have synths on this album, don't get me wrong. It's just that in comparison to previous work, the production is incredibly boring. Moving on, Speed of Light. Already reviewed that track. It is a solid rock track. That is it. It is a single, and singles are meant to be marketable and incredibly tame. Solid. That's it. The Great Unknown. Now, this is where the album starts to go, okay, alright, maybe this album will be really, really good. I like The Great Unknown. The Great Unknown has some pretty good solos in it. And you're probably going to hear me say that a lot. The solo work on this album is exceptional. And there are a lot of solos, do not get me wrong. And then it's immediately taken away with the Red and the Black. The Red and the Black has a great opening and closing section. Ultimately, the stuff in between that opening and closing section is incredibly boring. This is a 13.5-minute long song, and it has no reason to be that long. It should be half of that duration. And I'm sitting here listening to this album, and halfway through this song, I'm like, okay, this is the 4th track on the album. I'm 30 minutes in, and I'm bored to death. And I don't understand what's going on in Maiden's heads where they think that they have to make a long song at all. I mean, back in the 80s, that was awesome when they made one long song, and it usually closed out the album. It was cool. Here, we've got track 4, 13.5 minutes. Track 6, 10.5. And then track 5 on disc 2 is 18 minutes. 18 minutes. We'll get to Empire of the Clouds soon. When the River Runs Deep, there were some points where I was with Bruce's vocals, and yeah, I know he recently had that whole thing with cancer. I get it. But there are some points where it's hard to understand what he's saying on this track. Because of, I'm not sure if it's necessarily because of the production or because of his performance. I want to say it's a mixture of both. It's okay, but the vocals are incredibly muddy on this one. And then we get the Book of Souls, which again, it does a turnaround. There are some really fucking awesome solos in the Book of Souls. Awesome guitar sections, which is primarily what I listen to Maiden for anyway. And I'm like, okay, alright. This track's pretty good. It's 10.5 minutes. I'm probably only going to listen to this maybe 3 or 4 times. Ever. It was a good track, though. Title track is fucking awesome. Sure. Guitar works great. Disc 2. Because double album. Death or Glory. Death or Glory suffers from When the River Runs Deep. There are some points where I thought Bruce Dickinson was not saying glory. And I'm not saying it's because of his accent. It's because of this fucking awful production. Mediocre at best. Shadows of the Valley. The opening of this track. Wasted Years. Everybody remembers that riff from Wasted Years, right? Yeah. There are a lot of notes in the beginning of Shadows of the Valley that are very reminiscent of the opening notes of Wasted Years. And that's not to say, oh, it's exactly the same. No, it's not, but it's close. When that song first came on, I'm like, okay, we're almost recycling content here. Wonderful. It's a good song, though. Great solos. Great solos in Shadows of the Valley. It's an awesome track. Tears of a Clown. Silliness. Silliness and trash. Worst track on this album, easily. Completely bored at at this point, I'm wanting this album to end. Because what? Tears of a Clown is the third to the last track, and I still have another 24 minutes when this album is done. 24 minutes. I am an hour into this album, and I'm bored out of my mind. And then, The Man of Sorrows. Completely forgettable. It's boring. Pales in comparison to other tracks off of the album. Insert complaint here. What I want to talk about is Empire of the Clouds. The Iron Maiden, the Bruce Dickinson written epic about airships. I like Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I like Alexander the Great. I like Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. I like To Tame a Land. I can't stand Sign of the Cross. This track, although it did go by a lot quicker than I thought it would, is bloated. It's way too long, and shows Iron Maiden's, I should say, lack of ability to cut themselves down, to edit themselves. To understand that sometimes less is more. Empire of the Clouds is the ultimate culmination of modern Maiden's excess. When the Wild Wind Blows on The Final Frontier was easily the worst track on the album. Completely took away from everything that I thought was great on that album. Empire of the Clouds, whereas, you know, Book of Souls, the title track, had some awesome solos, you can tell that Bruce Dickinson wrote this song, because it's primarily driven by the words he sang. The words don't exactly fit within the song structure, and it's about, oh, I don't know, airships. Take that as you will. For those of you who don't know, Bruce Dickinson's a freaking pilot. So naturally, it only makes sense that Bruce Dickinson would write a song about airships. Of course. Book of Souls has great moments. It does. The guitar work on here is exceptional at several points. Production-wise, and just the overall excess on this album is ultimately disappointing. When a Maiden album comes out, especially in the modern day, I'm always cautious. Because with modern Maiden, you're going to get moments where, again, there's excess or there's bad production. But in between those lines, every once in a while, you'll find a gem. You'll always find one song off of a Maiden album that's good or excellent. I have a few. Speed of Light, The Book of Souls. I feel like Shadows of the Valley has some great sections within. But this album leaves a lot to be desired and is ultimately disappointing to me. And it's not necessarily because I hyped myself up. It's because of the fact that it's just too long. And I feel like they should go back, they should just understand that less is more. And I know that all these Maiden fans are probably down here in the comment section right now just saying, how could you possibly say this, downvote, downvote? And honestly, I don't care. That system, it doesn't affect me at all. Comments, dislikes, it doesn't. But people go on here, onto YouTube, to look up album reviews. So that way, when they purchase an album and they listen to an album they really like and they look up album reviews, it is to reinforce their bias towards liking that album. And the second that a dissenting opinion, especially about Iron Maiden because they're one of the largest heavy metal bands in the world, the second that my dissenting opinion comes out, it is immediately shut out just because it's a difference of opinion. And I don't go into albums wanting to hate them. But unfortunately, this is an Iron Maiden album that will not stand the test of time. Much like Judas Priest's Redeemer of Souls, it shows a band that, a legacy act, that maybe just needs to stop. In my opinion, Maiden probably should have stopped in the mid-2000s, but then again, we wouldn't have gotten The Final Frontier. If I had to give this album a grade out of 10, I would give it a 4.5. It is ultimately disappointing. Almost average, slightly below average, at best. There are great sections on this album, don't get me wrong, and when those sections are great, they're great. But this album is bloated, overfilled, leaking with excess content, excess fat that just needs to be cut. Somebody in the comment section is probably going to make a comment about how I'm fat, and it's going to be funny. That's all I have to say about the Book of Souls. A super long album review for a super long metal album. Man, I hope Slayer can really pick up the slack off of this. I'm actually looking forward to Slayer. I await your feedback below if you even made it this far into the review. Thanks a lot for watching. Danny here from Metal Couch, signing out.